Welcome back to Hexagon Tutorials Dart series. Let's see how to write functions in Dart and why we use functions. A function is a block of code that performs a specific task. Instead of writing the same code multiple times, we define a function once and call it whenever needed. Why use functions? Reusability, write once, use multiple times. Modularity, breaks large programs into smaller, manageable parts. Readability makes the code cleaner and easier to understand. A function has a specific structure. First, we define what type of value it will return. Then, we give it a name, and if needed, we provide inputs called parameters. Inside the function, we write the code that performs a task. If required, the function can also return a value. Components of a function. Return type. It tells what kind of value the function will give back. If it doesn't return anything, we mention that too. Function name. This is the name of the function, which we use to call and run it. Parameters. These are optional inputs that we can pass to the function for it to work with. Return statement. This is also optional. It allows the function to send back a result after performing its task. Let's code what we learned so far about function. Here we are defining a function named say hello, whose return type is void, which means it will not return any value. We are printing hello guys in this functions. So whenever we will call this function, it will print hello guys. Here, we call the function twice, and it prints hello guys 2 times. Instead of writing the same code again, we simply call the function by its name. This is called reusability. We write the function once and use it multiple times whenever needed. Now, we are using a parameter called name, which is a string type. This allows us to print the name along with the message. When calling the function, we must pass a string value as an argument so the function can use it. A function can return a value using the return keyword. To do this, a return type must be specified before the function name instead of using void. This tells what type of value the function will return after execution. Functions are a powerful way to make our code more efficient and reusable. Instead of repeating the same code, we define a function once and call it whenever needed. We can also pass parameters to functions to provide input values, making them more dynamic. If a function needs to return a result, we use the return keyword and specify a return type. However, if a function doesn't return anything, we use void as the return type. By using functions, we can write cleaner, more organized, and easy to manage code. Now, let's dive deeper into function parameters and understand how they make functions more flexible. Function parameters allow us to pass values into a function when calling it. These values are called arguments, and they help us avoid hard-coding values inside a function. Instead, we can pass different values each time we call it, making the function more dynamic and reusable. Types of function parameters in Dart. First, we have required parameters. These are the most common type of parameters, and as the name suggests, they must be provided when calling the function. If we don't pass a value, the code won't work. Second, there are optional positional parameters. These are enclosed in square brackets, meaning they are not mandatory. If we provide them, they must follow the correct order. Otherwise, the function might not behave as expected. Next, we have named parameters, which are written inside curly braces. Instead of passing values in a specific order, we specify the parameter name while calling the function. This makes the code more readable and easier to understand. Named parameters can also be optional, depending on how we define the function. Instead of printing null, we can print customized text. Now, what if we want to use named parameters, but also ensure that the user must provide all the required values when calling the function? To handle this situation, we use the required keyword. This ensures that all specified arguments must be passed. Otherwise, the code will show an error. It helps maintain clarity and prevents missing values when using named parameters. Finally, we have default parameter values. Sometimes, we may want to provide a default value so that even if we don't pass an argument, the function still works properly. This helps prevent errors and ensures the function always has something to work with. By using different types of parameters, we can customize functions to handle a variety of situations, making our code more efficient and flexible. Summary of function parameters in Dart. In Dart, function parameters allow us to pass values when calling a function, making our code more flexible and reusable. Understanding different types of parameters helps us write cleaner and more efficient functions. Required parameters are those that must be provided when calling the function. If they are missing, Dart throws an error because the function expects a value to work with. Sometimes, we may not always need to pass every argument. In such cases, we use optional positional parameters, which are placed inside square brackets. Since they are optional, they might be null, so we use nullable types or provide a default value to avoid issues. However, the order of arguments still matters when passing these parameters. Named parameters, enclosed in curly braces, allow us to specify values using their names instead of relying on position. This makes the function call more readable and easier to understand. Unlike positional parameters, the order doesn't matter when passing named parameters. If a named parameter might be null, we can use the operator to provide a fallback value. By default, named parameters are optional. But what if we want to make sure certain named arguments must be provided? That's where the required keyword comes in. If we mark a named parameter as required, Dart will throw an error if we forget to pass it. This ensures that our function always gets the necessary values to work correctly. To prevent null values, we can set default values for optional parameters. This means that if an argument isn't provided, the function will use the default value instead. This makes function calls more flexible and reliable, as we don't always need to pass every parameter manually. Final recap. Required parameters must be provided or an error occurs. Optional positional parameters allow flexibility, but order matters, and they can be null if no value is given. Named parameters improve readability and allow arguments to be passed in any order. Required named parameters ensure important values are always provided, preventing errors. Default values help avoid null values by providing a fallback option when arguments are missing. By understanding these different types of parameters, we can write efficient, error-free, and more readable Dart functions. Now comes arrow function. Arrow functions provide a shorter and cleaner way to write functions in Dart. Instead of using curly braces and the return keyword, we use the fat arrow to define a function in a more concise way. Now, why should we use arrow functions? First, they make the code shorter and cleaner, reducing unnecessary syntax. Second, they improve readability, making it easier to understand at a glance. And finally, they are perfect for simple one-line functions where we just need to return a value. The syntax is straightforward. Instead of writing a full function with curly braces and a return statement, we simply use the fat arrow to return a value directly. This makes our code more efficient and elegant, especially when working with small functions. Let's have a quick recap of arrow function. Arrow functions help make code shorter and cleaner by replacing curly braces, and the return keyword with a fat arrow is equal to. The syntax is simple. Instead of writing a full function with and return, we use return type function name parameters is equal to expression. Arrow functions are perfect for single-line functions, especially when working with list operations like map and for each. However, they cannot be used for multi-line functions. For that, we need curly braces. Using arrow functions makes code more concise and readable, improving efficiency in Dart. Let's move to next topic, higher order functions. A higher order function is a function that either takes another function as a parameter or returns a function itself. Now, why should we use higher order functions? First, they make code more flexible and reusable, reducing repetition. Second, they are perfect for handling callbacks and functional programming, making code more efficient. And finally, they simplify operations on lists and collections, making tasks like filtering, mapping, and sorting much easier. Higher order functions are a powerful tool for writing clean and efficient Dart code. The function perform operation, INTA, INTB, function operation is designed to take two numbers and a function as input. Instead of writing separate functions for addition or multiplication, we pass the operation either add or multiply as an argument. This means the function executes dynamically. It doesn't decide what to do on its own. It simply performs whatever operation we pass when calling it. This makes the code more flexible because we can reuse the same function for different calculations instead of writing separate ones for each operation. The multiplier, int factor, function returns another function that takes a number and multiplies it by the given factor. We can store this return function in variables like double value and triple value, each with a different factor. For example, if we set double value is equal to multiplier 2, calling double value 5 means 5 times 2 equals 10. Similarly, if we set triple value is equal to multiplier 3, calling triple value 4 means 4 times 3 equals 12. This approach allows us to create custom multiplication functions dynamically, making the code more efficient and reusable. So the next topic is anonymous functions, also known as lambda expressions. An anonymous function is a function without a name, typically used for short, one-time operations where defining a full function isn't necessary. Now, why should we use anonymous functions? First, they eliminate the need to create separate functions for simple tasks. Second, they are great for passing functions as arguments, making code more flexible. And finally, they are widely used in list operations like map, filter, and for each, making it easier to manipulate collections. Anonymous functions help write cleaner and more efficient code in Dart. Let's look at the difference between a standard named function and an anonymous function in Dart. First, we have a named function called add, which takes two numbers as input and returns their sum. Since it has a name, we can call it whenever needed. Now, in the main function, we have the same logic written as an anonymous function. But notice something different. It has no name. This function still takes two numbers and returns their sum. But since it's anonymous, it can't be called directly unless we store it in a variable or pass it as an argument to another function. Anonymous functions are great for one-time operations, making code more concise and flexible. Here, we are assigning an anonymous function to a variable called multiply. This function takes two numbers, multiplies them, and returns the result. Since it's stored in a variable, we can use it just like a normal function. When we call multiply 4, 5, it executes the function and returns 4 times 5 equals 20. This method allows us to define functions on the go, making our code more flexible and efficient. We can pass anonymous functions as arguments to other functions, like for each. In this example, we have a list of names, and we want to greet each person individually. Instead of using a loop, we use the forEach method, which goes through each name in the list. Inside forEach, we pass an anonymous function that takes a single name as input and prints hello, name, for each person. When an anonymous function has only one expression, we can simplify it by using arrow syntax is equal to instead of curly braces. This makes the function shorter and more readable, while still keeping the same functionality. Arrow functions are perfect for quick operations like calculations, list manipulations, and simple return statements. In Dart, we can explicitly define function types when using anonymous functions. In Dart, functions can be stored in variables, just like numbers or strings. By using function types, we can ensure that the function takes the correct input and returns the expected output. For example, int function, int, means the function must take an integer as input and return an integer as output, preventing type mismatches. And to make the code even shorter and cleaner, we can use arrow syntax is equal to instead of curly braces. This approach makes functions more flexible, reusable, and type-safe. Let's summarize everything we've learned about anonymous functions in Dart. First, anonymous functions are functions without a name. Instead of defining them separately, we write them inline wherever they are needed. The basic syntax for an anonymous function is parameters, function body. This allows us to create small, reusable functions on the spot. Anonymous functions can also be stored in a variable, allowing us to call them later, just like regular functions. Additionally, they can be passed as arguments to other functions, making them extremely useful in functional programming. To make the code even shorter and cleaner, we can use arrow functions is equal to. This is especially helpful when the function consists of just one expression, as it removes the need for curly braces and the return keyword. Lastly, we can define the function type explicitly using function or return type function parameter type. This ensures type safety, making our code more organized and predictable. By using anonymous functions, arrow functions, and function types, we can write efficient, flexible, and readable code in Dart. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.